Hey there, welcome to my studio here in New York City. I'm Daniel Norton. If you're new to the channel, here I talk about philosophy, about technique, and about gear occasionally. This is part of my minimalist photographer series that I started. We've talked about lighting, we talked about both videos are about lighting, but one was about the lights themselves and the other one about modifiers. And now I'm going to talk about, it's going to be a sensitive subject here, cameras. So the camera is almost always going to be the very first thing that you got when you got into photography, right? And the cameras tend to be the thing that people focus on. Now, I have owned and do own many cameras. And I think that a video like this is going to be useful if I keep it in a more of a philosophical tone versus this is what I've got. I'll tell you what I have and I'll tell you why I use them. And depending on what you do, you will probably need something different. But it's a baseline. So number one, when you're looking at cameras, we need to consider the work that we do. Now, if you are doing this because you just love photography and you have money because you're working in a job that keeps you comfortable and you've got money to spend on it and it's not kind of a return on investment thing, then buy the best camera you can afford. If you are doing it as a business, you really need to consider not what you think clients want, not what you want, but what clients actually need. The clients that you have, the clients that you're going after, and what are your resources available if you don't own that thing anyways. So I live, and my studio is in New York City. This makes me very lucky because there are lots of places around where I could get access to gear if I needed it. Either because the job pays well enough that I can buy the piece of gear for the job and it kind of pays for itself, or I can rent it. But even if you live in distant places, unless a job falls suddenly in your lap, there are places where you can rent lenses, rent cameras, and they can be sent to you. So we want to really consider, what do we do on a day-to-day? If we are shooting, let's say like I do, portraits for people to use somewhat professionally, like actors and models, also for things like LinkedIn and those kind of things, as our primary business. Musicians are another thing I photograph. Magazine, size prints basically, so like 8.5 by 11 or 9 by 12 or whatever. Do we need 50, 100, 75 gazillion megapixels? In my opinion, in my experience, no, unless you are doing tons and tons of retouch. If your clients are exactly what I just mentioned, but you're doing beauty, that's a whole different ballpark. So for me, I settled on the Nikon series of cameras. I have the Z6 II, I have two of them. And these are my go-to everyday cameras. I can shoot most of what I shoot with them without having to rent, without having to borrow, without anything. When the occasion comes that I have a job where I need more megapixels, I rent. We have to always keep that in mind. What do you use for 80, 90% of your work? For me, about 95% of my work easily is accomplished with these cameras. I don't even give full res files to most people. So I give about half res and they're totally fine with it. So why do I have two? Well, you've got to have a backup camera if you're going to work professionally. If somebody's hiring you to do something, you need to make sure it gets done. You could, and I did this when I first started, you could rent a second camera for jobs. Have you one camera when you're shooting for yourself or for your portfolio, and then rent a second camera when you're doing a job. Just make sure you test it before you go out there, because even rental cameras can be, whatever. But you definitely don't want to show up on a job with only one camera. So we want to have two. You can likely get away with, unless you make a huge jump to something different, using the previous generation camera as your backup, right? If you've got let's say Nikon Z6 at this point, and you bought a Z6 II, you can relegate your Z6 to the backup camera, use your Z6 II, you're good to go. When you get another camera eventually, you move that Z6 out of the line, and then you have two Z6 IIs like I do. And that's basically how we move forward, right? We always want to have at least two. I think two is plenty in most cases for digital photographers. Back in the film days, I used to have 5 cameras, but that's because we couldn't always tell if they were screwing up the film. So 2 cameras, more than sufficient. But what about lenses? Well, again, this comes down to how you shoot and what you shoot. I shoot controlled portraits, primarily lit, primarily in studios. That means I don't particularly need super fast lenses. I'm not shooting in places where I need to get the background really out of focus, like really out of focus. And because of that, I'm very happy with using zoom lenses. I recommend zoom lenses when you're trying to be a minimalist. You can get fast zoom lenses, of course. I have the f4 zoom lenses. They're totally fine for most things. And what that allows me to do is not change lenses constantly and take two bodies with matching lenses, as it would be for me, and go out there and shoot interchangeably between the two bodies if, you know, a card gets full, or although I generally shoot tethered, if I want to have another, like one body to grab when I want to run around with one on the tripod. There's lots of reasons. It's just interchangeable. I also keep personally a couple of fast lenses. I have a 50 that's really fast and an 85 that's really fast. I use those for when I need the shallow depth of field, or for when I need, with the 50, or when I need a little bit more reach with the 85. This is my kit. This is not going to be the ideal kit for everybody. But when we think about our kit, we want to consider a couple of things. Some kind of a backup. What's the ranges of lenses we use mostly? How fast of lenses do we need? Having things that match is good if you do things like fashion, where you need consistency, which I do a bit of. So if I'm shooting, this is the reason why I have matching lenses, because it might seem obvious to have two different lenses, but the reality is that even if they're of the same series, if the two lenses are not the same lens, they might look slightly different in color and stuff like that. They shouldn't, but you know, in my experience, everything's not perfect in life. So having two matching lenses works really well there. If one of your lenses fails, you can switch back to the other one, or like I said, go back and forth between two cameras. Now, I have the added thing of that I also do video, as you can see here. So my secondary camera that I'm using for video is a Nikon Z6. So if I was to use what I just have with me here, I've got a Z6 II here, which is my primary shooting camera, and then I have a Z6, which I have fully rigged up for video, which I will do some B-roll so you can look at it. But that is my video setup, which I will do another video on because I feel like that's a separate thing. But I have dual purpose, right? So in my case, if I was doing a video and a catalog at the same time, I'm going to want to have three cameras. But I'm trying to narrow myself down to two because I think that's an ideal space for me to be in. I've talked about this in the beginning of the series that I feel like I have way more gear than I ever need or use, and I think a lot of us fall into that situation. If we truly evaluate the gear that we use and move on past gear that we don't use anymore, we can create a tighter kit, which makes us think about it less, which makes us more proficient with those items, which will, in the end, make us a better photographer, in my opinion. I would love to know what you think about that, though. Let me know in the comments. I'm sure you're going to tell me. Also, if you, I will put a link to this gear, but if you're interested in the gear I've talked about in the previous videos or the camera systems I use, including the rig and stuff, I will link to a PDF in the description. It goes to my mailing list. You sign up for the mailing list, you get the free PDF. You can always drop off if you want, but I don't send that many emails, so it's probably worth it to be part of it to see what's going on. But in any case, check that out. You can also check out a link to my Patreon in the description if you want to support the channel, and a link to the Discord server if you want to just join the conversation. In any case, if you got this far and you like the video, please like the video. Subscribe to the channel so you get more videos like this, and I'll talk to you soon.